And welcome on behalf of the University of the Incarnate Word and the Adeline Center for Civic Leadership and Sustainability here in San Antonio, Texas, and all around the world. It is beautiful and wonderful to see so many faces here being part of this wonderful conversation that we'll be having this morning. I was thinking about what was I going to say this morning, and at 3:30 in the morning, I was inspired by Maya Angelou. I actually had the blessed opportunity to meet Dr. Angelou when I was an undergraduate at Texas A&M University many years ago, and I remember she always had inspirational words. And one quote that just came to mind was, if one is lucky, a solitary fantasy can totally transform 1 million realities. If one is lucky, a solitary fantasy can totally transform 1 million realities. Well, I hope this morning's discussion is not necessarily a fantasy, but becomes reality in the sense to where at many times in my life, and I know I'm pretty young somewhat, I'm somewhat dismayed on the fact that we do not have as much advocacy and voices of women around the world. And I think it is because of the oppression, to be honest and transparent, of us as men. And I'm sad and bewildered by that many times. So I hope that this will inspire many of us to move forward, to have our voice, and for us as men to be listeners, not always have to be talkers and speakers and aggressive, but that we need to work collaboratively and work together because we are all God's people. And in order to make this world a better place, we need to do it together. And coming from a strong woman of my mom, and my wife is a pediatric doctor, I'm inspired and encouraged and hope that everybody works together. So thank you, sister, for allowing me to briefly welcome everybody. I will now turn it over to, hopefully future someday, Dr. Yesenia Caloca, the Assistant Director for the Adeline Center. I look forward to a great discussion and have a wonderful and blessed day and weekend. So thank you.
Good morning. Thank you, Dr. Gonzalez. Welcome y bienvenidos a todos, to everyone, to today's session on human rights, advocacy, educating, and empowering women's voices. My name is Yesenia Caloca, and I serve as the Assistant Director for the Adeline Center for Civic Leadership and Sustainability at the University of the Incarnate Word in San Antonio, Texas. The mission and values of UIW are deeply rooted in service, compassion, and social justice. Established in 1881 by the Sisters of Charity of the Incarnate Word, the goal of our UIW graduates is to become concerned and enlightened citizens within the global community. The awareness that we are all interconnected. And very much so, international experiences and knowledge, whether acquired firsthand or through secondary sources, are important and critical to the development of a global citizen. Article 1 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights states, all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. They are endowed with reason and conscience and should act towards one another in a spirit of brotherhood. Our students are working towards a more just and compassionate world through research, advocacy, and education. But they also realize that not all humans are born free and equal in dignity and rights, and that there is much work to be done. As we continue to grapple with this pandemic, let us continue to challenge the inequities, support and encourage each other, and be an advocate for change. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Darcy Renfro, and I would like to introduce our first speaker today, Safi, and let her introduce herself and also introduce this panel.
Hi everyone, my name is Safi Dorsey. I'm a junior at UIW. My major is business and a concentration in MIS and a minor in accounting. I'm passionate about addressing inequalities so that we can move each other forward, so that we can reach equality and equity. Every human being is entitled to human rights without barriers, conditions, and violation. In the times we are living in, rightfully so, there are concerns regarding the ethics of certain systems, laws, and traditions that interrupt people's fundamental rights. It is critical that we address the importance of these issues by hearing the impact of these violations and encourage others to learn and research on these issues too. An influencer of the conversation that will be shared today, the UN Sustainable Goals, encourages us to start discussions and join opportunities to further our own knowledge so that we can help each other reach peace and prosperity for everyone. To help each other further our knowledge today, we will be addressing and focusing on women's rights, addressing bodily integrity, equality, culture, violence, policies within institutions, environment, and society. Unfortunately, we still lack equality even in the most basic rights. But we must discuss, learn, and understand where the issues are to allow us to engage in action regarding how to change the pressing issues that we are facing as a society. Yesenia, Darcy, Erica, Natalie, Sema, and Victoria are here to discuss topics regarding the challenges and lives of women in society, including the women in the Shipibo Kanobi tribe and the challenges the women face, their impact on their community, as well as the importance of Indigenous cultures. Women's healthcare access, addressing insurance coverage, the policy and social change needed to change medical disparities. Women in immigration, discussing US immigration policies, status, and asylum process. The death penalty, reviewing the practice of executions, women advocates against the death penalty, and bias within the system. This panel invites conversation on the challenges concerning women's rights and roles, focusing on the objectives of the UN Sustainability Goals and the UN Declaration of Human Rights. We also encourage women and aspiring youth to participate in this conversation, using the information as an educational tool to better understand critical concerns happening in the world. Today, we seek to enlighten, emphasize, and encourage engagement in the issues of human rights while promoting women empowerment. Thank you.
Passport.
Yesenia, I think you're muted.
Yeah.
No, where's my passport?
I'm sorry about that. Greetings from San Antonio, Texas. My name is Yesenia Alcala. I am a third-year doctoral student at the University of the Incarnate Word. My passion is working with vulnerable communities and advocacy for women's voice. I would like to elaborate on the importance of building relationships, friendships, and embracing other cultures by learning from each other's way of living, concerns in our community, simple ways of communication to let each other know that we are thinking of each other. During this pandemic, it has been difficult, but there are ways to do it, whether by text, cell phone, and emails. And the plans we have for collaborative in-service learning workshops in the future with other nearby cross borders. One of my main goals is to share this knowledge between the Shipibo women of the Amazonian in Peru and with women at UIW, students, professors, personnel, alumni, and any other interested parties with an interest to share their skill of expertise to create a space of interactive learning. Next, please. The Shipibo women of the Peruvian Amazon. There was a movement from the Amazonian rainforest to Lima, Peru for the Shipibo women about 3 decades ago. The location of residence of these women is Cantagallo community in Lima, Peru. Some of their main objectives for these women of Amazonia: health, education, and housing, and also employment. This employment is their artisan work. The women are very self-sufficient. They are the head of their households, and the tribes that Karina, which is the leader of the Shipibo women that I am in contact with, she is responsible for leading the women to do their artwork and through the leadership, they support their families during these hard times, especially during this pandemic, which has limited their access for them to go out in the streets to sell their goods. And since they play such a key in their community, they don't have this accessibility to go out. This is where our friendship even started enriching each other's lives by getting to know each other and like, how can I assist so far away to the women? And there was many talks about this between Sister Martha Ann Kirk at UIW and Sister Kati Wanako, which is from Lima, Peru. But right now she is in St. Louis, Missouri, studying her master's program. And we collaborated and talked about how can we help these women that are 40 in the group that are led by Karina to be able to make enough funds to support their families. Next slide, please. And so we came into an action mode and said, how about if we start selling their items here in the US? Well, that next problem was, well, how do we get these items to the US, first of all? And there was a lot of brainstorming, and the women have a lot of pride. It's not like they just want handouts. They want to make sure that they're contributing. And so since I hadn't established that friendship yet, we started talking, getting to know each other first. There's a lot of respect involved, and our method of communication is Spanish. They are fluent in Quechua. I don't know Quechua. I'm fluent in Spanish, so we found a bridge to communicate, and that was through Spanish. And even communicating through Spanish there was hardships because there were some language barriers. So we would write out our sentences, translate them, and even do drawings. And to this day, we still do. It's been a year and a half that we've been communicating, and I've gotten to know Karina much better. And through her communication, she has led me to get to know also the other ladies. Next slide, please. So as I was talking with our communication, we've gotten to know each other better. We've established that bridge, and there's still more to be done. However, there was some money that I invested in the goods for the ladies. I was able to send that money, and in return, they sent me some items, and those items are sold on a website, but they're sold as the same amount that would be sold on the streets in Peru. And there is no money that I make other than what the ladies sent me, and I just send that money to them. We stay in touch at least once or twice a week. Right now, this is a picture of Karina. She is the leader of the Amazonian women, and that is her mom with her and her dad. Now, her mom and her dad still live in Pucallpa, Lima, which is over by the river in the Amazon. She is able to go visit her parents more frequently because of the sales that are done here in the US and all over the world that I've been getting assistance from everybody that's collaborated for their help. Right now, as of the last week, her mom has fell ill, and she has some issues with, many issues. However, she has been hospitalized and is receiving some care. This type of care does help with the sale of the artisan items. And so it's very important, the friendships that we establish here in the US and anywhere else, to people that need help, but are able to collaborate with us at the same time, and we learn from each other, we share the knowledge. And this wouldn't have been possible if University of the Incarnate Word didn't have in-service learning trips to other countries where we are able to meet other people from other cultures, other religions, and we share what we take in, and they share with us the way they live, the way they communicate, what they cherish, how they do their living, how women are able to be leaders in countries that sometimes leadership is of no existence, and they still proceed to want to learn, to have stable jobs, to earn a good education for their siblings, their parents, for healthcare. Next slide, please. And I'm sorry if I get emotional, but I've grown very close to the women, and I embrace their leadership skills. And Karina, she lives in Lima, Peru, and she travels to Selva Pucallpa, like I mentioned, at least as frequent as she can, if not once a month. In this video that I'm about to show, she has traveled over to Pucallpa in search of leading the women with more innovative ways of making artisan items that can be sold in the markets. Now, the women have been left by their husbands, and they try to be as self-sufficient as possible to feed their families. There is no light, there's no electricity, so all their work is done during daylight. Could you please press on the video? Thank you. I don't know if you're able to hear the recording.
I do not hear any sound, Yesenia.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Let me make a suggestion. Let's go out of screen share. Darcy, please put escape, go out of screen share, turn screen share on again, and you need in the lower left corner to enable sound and best quality. And this will only take a moment, and we can see everybody's wonderful faces as we're going out of screen share, putting on sound in screen share. And isn't it wonderful to see so many faces? 55 people. And if you look in the chat box, you see that we are from many different parts of the world, and we're doing many wonderful things. So we will get the PowerPoint back up with screen share, sound enabled, best quality.
So let me unmute myself and see if that might help with the sound. Let me see. Can you guys hear that? No.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe what you have to do is open the actual link on YouTube or wherever the platform is actually at. And yeah, maybe that can work as well.
I think we were hearing it. Dr. Acosta wrote in the chat box, she could hear it softly.
It was just the volume wasn't loud enough because I could.
Let me see if I can turn up the volume then, and if that helps.
This is great. We're helping each other all over the world. And here are our sisters in the Amazon.
Trabajo de artesanía, su pedido de posavasos.
What the ladies are making here are coasters, beaded coasters. And those coasters are on the website. They were actually the ones that they sent to me. And she was just saying greetings, that she was in Pucallpa and that they were making posavasos, which is a coaster. And that is something that is not native to the women. However, they are finding different type of innovative ways to make other things than native beaded work that is usually like a little hat, necklaces, earrings like the ones I'm wearing today. Now they're making purses, they're making scarves, and their main embroidery, and I say main, is a piece of linen, which the linen is organic, and their dyes are made from berries and rocks and soil and mud and water, and they darken the colors by the color of the mud, whether it's dark or brown. And as they add more color into it, they make just an array of different colors. And in there's a thread that is very intricate. And every little piece of thread is an Ícaro, which is a song of the Shipibo. And in that Ícaro, there is a whole theme within their embroidery, and it's beautiful. And that is one thing that I think every student should learn about, that is interested in the indigenous culture, because it's something that is not dying out, but the younger children of the Shipibo are being educated, or they're trying to get an education, and that's what they're fighting for right now. But it might start to be something that dies out. And so it is very important to learn of their culture, because these are the beginnings of many years ago that could influence now to learn about the indigenous culture. Next slide, please. These are some of the items that have been shipped to me. Also on the bottom, that is an innovative type of purse that they've learned how to make, and it's all beaded. Those are the textiles on the left corner. There's some bracelets from some of the customers that have bought them. They've sent me pictures. There is also, the coasters are over here on the right-hand side. Next slide, please. And these are cards that I'm an international BBA, and my MBA is in general business. However, I don't have, I have some marketing skills, but I came up with this little card that I insert in all the shipments. And in it, it's Mujeres Empoderadas, Juntas Podemos Cambiar el Mundo. Empowered women together can change the world by their artisan work. And here's Karina distributing food from the funds that are received for their artisan items that are sold online, or the sales that they make in Lima. And when she goes over to Pucallpa, she distributes rice, beans, and the people will gather. And the little huts is actually their homes that they share with the community. And over here's a lady receiving her food. And Karina has just been very happy and praised that she has been able to extend these type of artisan items onto the world through the website. Next slide, please. Here is some of the basic objectives that they are trying to fight for Comunidad Shipibo Conibo de Cantagallo, Emergencia. The emergency in Cantagallo right now is for education, healthcare, and housing. The women, they live in the slums of Peru, which is now the dump site. And they want their community, they want healthcare, they want education for their children. This is why they've had to leave the Amazon in order to make better means, a better life, something that cannot be done right now at the Amazon with all the deforestation, all the violence. They want a better life, and hope that this opens the gates for bridging into other countries to be able to help the women. Next slide, please. Here is, I hope you can see this video. This was sent about 3 weeks ago, and this is Karina and her secretary. It is in Spanish.
Y mi castellano es Elisa Martínez Ricoba, tengo edad de 34 años. Vengo trabajando con la señora Karina Pacaya en la asociación Ashirel B hace 10 años. Soy la secretaria. Estamos liderando la comunidad en la búsqueda de oportunidad como salud, educación, dentro de ello como la vivienda digna de cada familia. Nuestra lucha como mujer indígena Shipibo Conibo es indispensable. Gracias. Bueno, como ya lo dijo, buenas tardes. Mi nombre en castellano es Karina Pacaya Cruz. Soy la presidenta de la asociación Ashirel. tal como ya lo dijo la secretaria. Me viene acompañando durante estos procesos de lucha dentro de la capital, y el trabajo arduo como mujer estamos liderando día a día para bienestar de cada familia. Sabemos muy bien que todas las adversidades que nos encontramos dentro de la comunidad, ahora en esta situación, tanta vulnerabilidad, sabemos muy bien el tema de salud, el tema de COVID, pero de todos modos salimos día a día como mujer, luchando a diario para poder sobresalir.
I believe there's a part 2.
Y sobrevivir, y seguimos adelante en nuestra lucha hasta conseguir nuestra vivienda digna. Ya como ya le dijo la secretaria, nuestra lucha como mujer es indescansable. Seguimos de pie para seguir adelante con nuestros hijos, para obtener lo que ya se viene comentando o buscando las oportunidades. Ya sabemos que el gobierno dentro de nuestro país no nos está dando la oportunidad. Pero sin embargo, estamos acá a través de nuestras artesanías, sobresalimos para estudio de nuestros niños, para alimento de nuestros niños. Es la lucha diaria, no solamente en el hogar, también cumplimos un rol muy importante como mujeres luchadoras en lo que es la política, en la sociedad, las adversidades que tanto nos atropella ante nuestras leyes, nuestros derechos, violenta nuestros derechos. Entonces, como comunidad, sin embargo, sobresalimos a diario con la esperanza de seguir adelante y con el apoyo que nos puedan brindar de acá en la capital, como peruanos que somos, una vivienda digna que necesitamos, una comunidad Shipibo-Conimo. Pero sin embargo, seguimos luchando como mujer y fuerte que somos. Muchas gracias. Irak Cabano.
I'd like to thank you for joining me and assisting the women from the Shipibo-Canibo. And there are future goals to be travels to Peru and learn more about their culture and be able to be of assistance to them and help them in any way possible. Thank you very much. Next will be Erica and Natalie.
Hi, thank you everyone for coming. My name is Erica Ruiz, and Natalie Villarreal and I will be talking about healthcare disparities. I'm a UIW senior at UIW, and she is a senior at St. Mary's University. We're both starting medical school in July, so we're really passionate about medical advocacy, equal access to healthcare, and we're really dedicated to serving our community and are passionate about women's healthcare. Next slide, please. So I wanted to start a discussion by talking about the importance of acknowledging health is a human right. The lack of health impedes a person from living their full potential, and limiting their access to health resources is a violation of human rights. A person's socioeconomic status, gender, sexual orientation, ethnicity, race, and religion, not limited to any of these that I mentioned, should never determine the quality of healthcare that they receive. And I wanted to discuss that, although the details that our discussion is based on are on US policy, but the issues that we discuss are important worldwide. As women, we can work together to bring light to the issues that affect universal healthcare access. And I hope that the topics that we discuss work to inspire you all to look into the healthcare policies and disparities that your communities may face. Next slide, please. And Natalie will now be discussing some of the barriers to healthcare access that we see. Thank you.
Thank you, Erica. I'm Natalie, and I want to just reinforce that the barriers to healthcare access that I'm about to talk about are very much the United States issues, but these issues go past the United States and they are global in many cases. And so one of the things that we've seen, a thing about the United States healthcare system is one of the policies that has been made to help Americans be able to afford health care was the Affordable Care Act. And that made insurance programs that help Americans be able to afford health care in simple terms. So some barriers that we've seen in the past few years is that the previous presidential administration allowed states to add work requirements to Medicaid, which is one of the programs that falls under the Affordable Care Act. And so these work requirements make it really difficult for people who can't work, but still deserve access to affordable health care. So people may not be able to work because they're physically unable, or possibly because they're a caregiver to someone else who can't work, but that doesn't make them undeserving of affordable health care. Another thing that we've seen is that the previous administration supported allowing states to eliminate regulations that prevent private insurers from taking an individual's pre-existing conditions into account when setting premiums or coverage terms, and that require insurers to cover certain services. And so now states could take an individual's pre-existing conditions into account when setting how much they're going to pay for their healthcare. And so eliminating these regulations allow insurers to offer cheaper plans to healthier people, which could increase the number of people with some coverage of healthcare, but generally increases premiums and cost sharing for people with these pre-existing conditions. And I don't think that no one wants to be sick, right? So it's not particularly fair that people with these pre-existing conditions that they didn't choose are having to pay more just because of something they can't help. Another thing we've seen is that limiting of funding for Medicaid. And so usually the federal government pays insurers to motivate them to stay in the Affordable Care Act insurance exchanges and offer subsidies that help keep premium costs low for their clients. But in 2017, we saw that the federal government suddenly stopped paying these subsidies. So insurers still had to offer these subsidies to low-income people applying for insurance, but the federal government was no longer reimbursing them. And so they didn't really have that incentive there anymore. And what ended up happening is that they needed to make up for that loss of money somewhere else. So insurers addressed this by increasing the price of the silver plan on health insurance, which is a more expensive plan under Medicaid. And so where the real damage is for people who aren't eligible for these subsidies, who are not making a lot, but they are making just a little bit too much to qualify for those subsidies. And so they're just priced out of comprehensive Affordable Care Act compliant insurance. And so really just priced out of comprehensive affordable healthcare. And so a final thing that I want to address is that originally the Affordable Care Act created programs and an advertising budget to help people figure out the specifics of the federally run insurance program. And health insurance can be complicated. And so we understand why people would want help to sign up for this healthcare and sign up for coverage. But in August of 2017, the administration significantly cut the federal funding for these programs. And they did that to depress enrollment, and they have depressed enrollment. And as a result, we saw increased insurance prices under what should be affordable care. And so we're seeing that recently President Biden has announced efforts to help improve the Affordable Care Act, and we're hoping to see changes. And so Erica is going to talk a little bit more about that.
Yes, so moving on to the next slide, please. Thank you. So the current administration has been making a point to strengthen Medicaid and the Affordable Care Act. With this, they hope that the Department of Health and Human Services will open for special enrollment from February 15th of this year till May 15th of this year. This just allows more people to be able to qualify. And this plan also directs agencies to re-examine some of the following that I will bring up. So some of this would be policies that undermine protections for people with pre-existing conditions, as Natalie was mentioning, including complications related to COVID-19. This is a big issue. We don't want people who, suffered with COVID to have more expensive premiums or be denied the access to healthcare, health insurance. Demonstrations and waivers under Medicaid and the ACA that may reduce coverage or undermine programs, including work requirements. And also policies that undermine the health insurance marketplace or other markets for health insurance, as well as the policies that make it more difficult for people to enroll in Medicaid and the Affordable Care Act, and policies that reduce affordability of coverage or financial assistance, including for dependents. Something else that has been brought up by the current administration is the intent to protecting women's health at home and abroad, and the presidential memorandum to protect and expand access to comprehensive reproductive health care, as well as possibly resigning the global gag rule that is also referred to as the Mexico City policy, which bars international nonprofits that provide abortion counseling or referrals from receiving US funding. And lastly, it would also, they hope to direct the Department of Health and Human Services to take immediate action to consider whether to resign regulations under Title X Family Planning Program. And with this Title X family program, it's a big issue with physicians currently. So basically the federal government can, give funding to clinics or facilities to give services such as pelvic exams, STIs, family planning, etc. But they prohibit the counseling or even referrals or even mentioning that they have the option for abortions. So it's a big ethical dilemma whether, accepting federal money to give access to people in need and, for things that they need, but also limiting their options. So what do you do in that situation? You want funding for your clinic. So it's something that we should definitely have in mind and think about moving on. And we can move to the next slide, please. Thank you, Darcy. So something that we can't ignore is that there's a lot of racial disparities in our country. Minorities in this country do not receive the same care as non-minorities, and they have higher rates of mortality, morbidity, and this is just completely unacceptable. But what I wanted this discussion to lead into is, thinking and brainstorming on how we can reduce this bias. Something that I do believe that will lower this bias and disparities in our country and around the world would be bettering medical education for medical students, increasing representation of all minority groups in medical studies, clinical cases, and increasing diversity within the healthcare system. So having more doctors being minorities, more nurses, or any fields. The CDC has also mentioned that the implement of standardized protocols and quality improvement initiatives, especially among facilities that serve disproportionate affected communities, would help lower disparities, as well as identifying and addressing implicit biases in healthcare that would likely improve patient-provider interactions, health communication, and health outcomes. All of these are great ways to start, but I hope that we just start discussing and brainstorming what we can do as a community to lower these biases. We all have implicit bias, and we have to acknowledge that. And I think that is like the first step into bettering it and eliminating the bias that we see that ultimately leads to, the higher mortality and morbidity rates of minorities in our community that, needs to be eliminated. And yeah, as we mentioned, all of these topics are very US focused, or the details of our discussion, but all of these issues are seen worldwide. And we just hope that just being aware of these issues and the policies that may undermine healthcare access to women and the population in general, that we can work to identify these and diminish them in our own communities. I know all of our viewers are from around the world, so we hope that we just inspire you to talk about these issues. Thank you.
Yeah, so moving into women's healthcare access, I know Erica talked about protecting women's health at home and abroad. And women's healthcare access is a topic really dear to my heart because I'm an aspiring OBGYN, so women's health is important to me, and their access to healthcare is really important to me as well. So I talked a lot about the Affordable Care Act, but I just want to give you guys like an example of why it's been so important, especially to women. So only 12% of individual health plans covered maternity care before the Affordable Care Act, right? Leaving women responsible for paying for the thousands of dollars for the birth of their children. And so to give some perspective, the average price of having a baby through vaginal delivery is between $5,000 and $11,000 in most states. And so now after the Affordable Care Act, most cover it. 10% of women are still insured with higher rates among low-income women and women of color. And this is due in part to the court's decision to give states the choice to opt out of covering more people through Medicaid. And so again, we want to see policy change there. Another harmful policy is that we've seen policies have cut off cost sharing reduction payments to insurers that are very vital to helping low-income women afford health insurance. And it issued rules allowing almost any employer to refuse birth control without out-of-pocket costs as required by the Affordable Care Act. And it recently proposed rules to expand the sale of junk plans that openly discriminate against women, which makes them obviously harmful. One topic that I really want to talk about is period poverty. And this is a really important issue that many women, even outside of the United States, the details that I'm about to share with you are very focused on United States statistics, but this issue, you can understand how it goes past and expands globally. So period poverty is a term that encompasses the inequalities associated with menstruating and having access to menstrual hygienic tools. And so eliminating period poverty would encompass having access to all of the following: hygiene education, sanitary products, washing amenities, and waste management. And all of these things are part of the social determinants of health. And that's kind of a weird term, but the social determinants of health hold that a lot more things affect health than just the healthcare we receive. So, for example, health starts where we live, where we go to school, where we work, and who we identify with. It depends on how one takes care of themselves, like how they eat, if they're active. And if we are active, also depends on where we live, where we go to school, where we go to work. Is it safe to go for a run in your neighborhood? Or do you feel like it's not safe? You could potentially be in danger because you don't live in a safe area. Do you have access to clean water where you live, go to work, or go to school? Do you have a clean place to go to the bathroom at school or at work or at home? And so this is what I mean when we say the social determinants of health hold that more things affect health than the healthcare we receive. And so that's the issue. When impoverished people can't afford things like food or housing, how do we expect them to take care of their hygiene? And so according to the Shriver Report, in 2014, over 42 million women were living in poverty in the United States. And many of these women experienced some loss of pride through being unable to properly care for themselves during their menstrual cycles. And according to a study done in 2019, 64% of low-income women were unable to afford menstrual hygiene products at some point in the last year. And 21% of these women experienced this issue monthly. And so almost half of these women had at least one time in the past year where they needed to choose between food and menstrual products. And so you can see why this is a huge issue. There are many organizations working to eliminate period poverty because you see how this is a large issue, which a lot of women are facing. And so these are good because they strive to raise awareness of how many women are living in poverty and struggling because of lacking period resources. They're also working to aid nationwide and community-based menstrual product supply initiatives to provide a reliable supply to women who are struggling. And they're also fighting for a legislative change that makes menstrual products more accessible to women regardless of income. And it's just, we want to see that policy change because over 38 million people in the United States are living at or below the poverty line, and over half of this population consists of women. So we're seeing that this is a really large group that's struggling against this issue. And again, it's global. So we really would like to see policy change that sets an example for the rest of the world, right? And hopefully influences positively the rest of the world. And so thank you for listening to us present on these important issues and health disparities that affect us in the US and also greatly affect the rest of the world too. And so I'm going to pass it off to Darcy and Shema with immigration.
Hi, everyone. I already introduced myself at the beginning, but let me introduce myself again. My name is Darcy Renfro. I am a recent UIW graduate. I recently graduated in December with a bachelor's in government. I became very passionate about the Western Hemisphere, especially when it comes to human rights. Growing up in San Antonio in a very diverse, very Hispanic city affected my passion for immigration reform and for human rights overall. But I'm also presenting with my wonderful partner, Sema, who herself was an immigrant, and I will let her introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. My name is Shema, and I'm a high school freshman at Engineering and Technology Academy, planning on attaining a major in astrophysics and aerospace engineering. And I'm a STEM student and a competitor in various STEM projects, and I am passionate about bringing awareness to social injustice around the world as much as I can. Today, I will be providing my personal immigration story along with Darcy's presentation.
So let me get started on how we define immigration itself in the US shapes how we understand the issue of women's rights. So in the US, people tend to fall under two categories, one as an asylum seeker and another as an economic migrant. And oftentimes the area that you come from affects the category that you fall into. So as a asylum seeker, these are refugees who are people who cannot return to their country of origin because of a well-founded fear of persecution, conflict, violence, or other circumstances that have seriously disturbed public order and require international protection. And oftentimes this applies to refugees. They don't have to be recognized as refugees, but all refugees are initially asylum seekers. And economic migrants are people who are leaving their country purely out of financial reasons. And this could be that there's been a lot of unrest in their country, so they have to leave their country to migrate to another one to try to find work. And oftentimes, they do not fall under the same criteria for refugee status and are not entitled to receive international protection due to that status. And a lot of times this is a title given to many migrants from Latin America coming to the US. And I know even when I was talking to Sema about how she understood immigration, especially coming from our southern border, she said, well, aren't a lot of them economic migrants? And under the Immigration and Nationality Act, the president is the one who establishes the overall refugee admission ceiling, especially when it comes to from what countries are we willing to accept more people from. And this comes down to regional allocations. Beginning at each fiscal year, following a consultation with Congress, which is a very American way of understanding immigration. But when it comes to which region you come from affects how easily you can come into the country to seek asylum. This has a global impact on how we understand human rights and how we defend those seeking asylum. And 2019, the refugee ceiling was actually at the lowest it had been since its inception in the 1980s, with it being set at 30,000 refugees. And this is also set by the president. So the asylum process in the US, especially when it comes internationally or just in the US, to be eligible for asylum, a person must show that they have a well-founded fear of persecution on the grounds of race, religion, nationality, political opinion, or membership in a particular social group. And so in the past, this often includes women from Central America facing domestic abuse, because due to their inclusion in the social group of being women, they can seek asylum because they often face a higher rate of violence and abuse from partners or male family members. This was until June 2018, as the Trump administration's Attorney General Jeff Sessions overturned asylum protections for victims of domestic violence and gang violence, arguing that the administration was just cutting down on some of the extraneous language when it comes to asylum and to try to establish clear standards. And this is not the first time that this has happened within the administration, as another regressive action that happened underneath this the Trump administration was that the State Department's annual human rights report since 2017 excluded any details about analysis of violence against women worldwide and stopped reporting anything about women or girls' reproductive rights. And like I said, this is something, while it's happening in the US, this impacts how we advocate for women's rights internationally. And Jeff Sessions, as Attorney General, said this was no longer the case, and that while they were nearing what they considered the grounds for asylum, he also was quoted as saying, "Asylum was never meant to alleviate all problems, even all serious problems that people face every day all over the world." And so this shows like this lack of advocacy towards women's rights, and rather than focusing on the protection of women, seeing it as a back burner to other international human rights issues. Oh, my bad. This was all done under the claims that past policies would allow migrants to exploit the US's immigration law. And even as of March 2021, this is still in place, with many women who are trying to seek asylum in the US due to being a victim of domestic abuse still being very limited in their options. And as we've reached a new administration under the Biden administration, in his first couple of days in office, February 2nd, President Biden signed an executive order related to immigration to create a task force chaired by the Department of Homeland Security's secretary, with the intention of reuniting all families that were separated under the Trump administration, and also to put a 100-day stop order on all or most deportations in the US. And while that happened, there was a lawsuit filed by the state of Texas, which the majority of today's speakers are from. So that something's always happening. We recently had snow here too for the very first time in a while. So very eventful state. If you can learn anything about the US, learn that. But they sued over that ban. And because of that, a US district Judge Drew Tipton issued a injunction stating that the memorandum violated federal law and risked imposing additional costs to the state. And this memorandum this injunction later became an indefinite ban on the 100-day memorandum overall. And so the last thing I'm going to talk about before moving over to Sema is the impact that the fear of police and the danger that this fear can have on well-being, especially when it comes to cases with the fear of officials such as ICE, women's willingness to come forward about violent partners and to come forward about human trafficking cases. In a study done by the UCLA, 67% of police officers surveyed reported that this impacted their ability to protect crime survivors, and that 67% reported an adverse impact on officer safety as well. Prosecutors surveyed as well also responded that crimes such as domestic violence and sexual assault and human trafficking were harder to investigate and prosecute because of immigrant crime survivors fearing immigration consequences if they came forward. And this included judges also feeling this effect, with 57% of judges participating in this survey reporting that court cases were interrupted due to immigration crimes survivors' fear of coming to court. And this affects the protections provided by the UN when it comes to women's rights in each country, especially for a developed country like the United States, that women, due to their status or due to their immigration, have a fear of coming forward to get the protections that are put in place for them. But it's not all, while there's the problems, there's also a beauty in the immigrant community that in the United States, and I'll let Sema talk a little bit about her own experience with that.
Hey, so after many were fired from their jobs, including my parents, and many were thrown in jail because they opposed the dictatorship in Turkey, my family and I soon realized that we had to flee our country if we wanted to stay together. When we heard of innocent people even being kidnapped and tortured just because they opposed the dictatorship in Turkey, just because they did not agree with the president's opinions, we tried getting our things, which consisted of one backpack for each family member, ready as soon as we could. And we went to the closest place possible, which was Greece. After staying in Athens, Greece for 8 months, my dad came to the USA with his visa and applied for asylum. And after that, for family unification. Our case got approved relatively quickly. Asylum and family unification processes usually take up to 3 years to get approved. We could meet my dad and come here after 12 months, which is crazy fast. And even though our asylum process was shorter than most, it still was a long time to spend in a country that we knew nothing about. And the majority of our time in Athens was filled with worry and fear. One of the reasons why our time in Athens was filled with worry was because we were afraid of any kind of government official, as so known as fear of authorities. During the first 3 months of our stay there, we moved to 10 different Airbnbs in order to not look suspicious and blend in as tourists as much as we could. During wintertime, we couldn't find any Airbnbs because they were just closed, as tourists didn't really come to Greece during winter. So we had to go outside of the city just to find a house, so like somewhere to live in for a few days. And you can say we were pretty paranoid, as we still couldn't convince ourselves that we were out of the reach of the Turkish police. We would go outside. We would go outside in Paris just in case there was someone following us. Going to the U.S. Embassy to do an interview, or being in the airport with our completely legal and official documents were all terrifying for us, because everyone was just filled with the police, with potential forces that might deport us back to Turkey, the place we fled out of fear of our lives. And while we were trying to get used to this new life amongst fear and concern, my family and I tried to adapt as best as we could. We took turns to go grocery shopping and clean the house, etc. And I realized I was dreading the days where it was my turn to go to the grocery store because I started feeling too nervous to even talk to the cashier when all I had to say was a simple thank you. I look at customers around me and wonder if others felt the extreme anxiety that I felt. And I didn't have any friends. My family and I would all be in our separate places, just minding our business as we couldn't tolerate anyone anymore. And so, as a result of my lack of communication with people, my social anxiety came to a point where I couldn't look even my family members in the eye. I would be too nervous to communicate with anyone in real life, and my phone and people in it became my life support. And here on the slides, I put a few photos that I took of Athens and its famous places. But the second picture at the top is a picture that I took from the window of the boat that took us from Turkey to Greece. We had to stay in that boat for a whole day and like not move or not make any noise because someone else could hear us and we could be doomed. And one of my biggest, by the way, we can move on to the next slide. And one of my biggest problems at that time, other than missing my dad and dealing with social anxiety, was the fact that I wasn't learning anything at all. Our family unification that my dad applied for as soon as he became an asylee could get approved anytime. So we didn't rent a regular house, but rather switched Airbnbs. We didn't go to school because the thought of starting a life in Greece felt like it meant we would be stuck there forever. During this period of my life, I started picking up some hobbies purely out of boredom. I saw my sister drawing something, so I started drawing, and you can see a few of my drawings there. But after a while, drawing didn't feel enough, so I started playing the flute as I liked how it sounded, and now I'm in marching band at my school. And it did give me something to be busy with, but it still wasn't enough. I still couldn't fill my 24 hours a day with things that made me feel productive. Then I started reading the world classics, following the advice of a teacher. Photography and cooking were other hobbies that I picked up during then, and I started spending my days at home this way. And as I found more coping mechanisms by exploring opportunities around me, our family unification finally got approved after 12 months. Like I mentioned, we later found out that it would usually take up to 2 to 3 years to get this approved. I guess we're really lucky. However, I didn't feel as happy as I thought I would when I received the news. I had made awesome friends here and found peace in between uncertainties and countless worries. Now I had only a month to bid farewell to the city and marvelous people in it. And here I really want to thank the great people in there because they've helped me and us a lot, like through everything. We could just easily get help from them. And um, as a Turkish student, I was always taught that the Greeks were the enemy, but that definitely was not the case when I was in Greece as a refugee. And the end of my journey here meant a brand new beginning, a new country with new people, a new language, and a new opportunity at learning. After stepping foot into San Antonio, the first thing that shocked me was how warm and humid it was outside, despite it being the night. I later came across many more things that shocked me, such as big people, big supermarkets, pretty much big everything. Right now, I'm skipping my physics period in my big school to deliver you my story. And I have to say, this country has countless flaws and problems, but you can always find an opportunity here with hard work and a bit of luck. And by opportunity, I mean my school. And as shown in the pictures, I am part of Rocketry, Robotics, Cyber Patriot, and Technology Student Association. And on the pictures, you can see me talking to a rocketry mentor, flying my rocket, programming a robot, and being in Cyber Patriot, which are all amazing opportunities. I'm lucky to have the amazing parents I have, to be going to school that provides all kinds of opportunities, like I mentioned, and to be doing this presentation now with Darcy and to have an audience of this many. Thank you for coming and listening to what we've had to say today. And now I'll hand the mic to Victoria. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm Victoria, and I am a senior at the University of Incarnate Word. I am an aspiring sociologist, researcher, and global citizen. And growing up in the central part of San Antonio, I was very familiar to constant reminders of the harsh realities we see every day: poverty, homelessness, substance abuse, mental health concerns. And it did leave an impact, and UIW provided an opportunity for me to empower and strengthen my education, but also come into my place and find the issues dear to my heart that I would like to contribute to and speak on. And today, if you could get the next slide, please. My presentation strongly focuses on the death penalty as a national and global concern. And the death penalty as a system is one that inflicts harm to not only women's rights, but entirely human rights, and is a violation of that. And the death penalty is one of the great moral issues facing our country. Yet most people rarely think about it, and very few of us take the time to delve deeply enough into the issue to be able to make an informed decision about it. This is a beautiful quote, an accurate quote from Sister Helen Progine. And if you could get the next slide, thank you. And Sister Helen Progine is a Catholic sister, but a female and a leading advocate working to abolish the death penalty. And she was born in 1939 in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. And from there, in the 1950s, she joined the St. Joseph, Sisters of St. Joseph. And through her experiences, she moved to New Orleans and began work with the poor and living among the poor. And during this time, she began correspondence with inmates on death row. And as she did this, she became a spiritual advisor, and she explains this testimony in her book, Dead Man Walking, which is a testimony and account of the death penalty in the United States. And when the book was released, it's in the 1970s, she was able to spark national dialogue at a time when capital punishment, the favor of capital punishment was at its highest. Since then, it has declined, and we will discuss that more so in a bit. But as a prime example of a woman leading and advocating to promote life and human rights and collaboration among all faiths and non-faiths, is a prime example of what I hope to do and what we can do. And next slide, please. And the death penalty historically has had a purpose. It's been a practice for lawful purposes, but also spiritual ones. We have seen it throughout ancient societies. In China, it was the first formal recording of criminal laws that entailed death sentences. It was also in Africa and Egypt, was in ancient times to have forced suicides. It was also as well in Mesoamerica, it was common to practice executions of prisoners of war, spiritual sacrifices. Athens themselves, every crime was punishable by death. Throughout society and our history, it's been common to practice executions, but as long as that has been carried out, there has been some form of opposition or alternative to that. Something comparable to life without parole today would be slavery or exile at that time. But reasons of execution could be anything from theft, cheating, willful murder, of varied sources. And in some instances, in some countries, minor offenses are still punishable with death sentences this way. Executions in the American colonies did not begin till the 1600s. And around the 1700s is where you begin to see forms of reformation and advocacy and people speaking out against this violation of human rights. It was Cesare Beccaria, a criminologist, early criminologist, who wrote Crime and Punishment, and kind of bring that momentum in the 19th century for reformation, and really promoting that as a government entity. We want to promote and not inflict against human life. And next slide. From a sociological perspective, the death penalty is a system that is inherently flawed. When I discuss the death penalty and a lot of the research I've seen, when having these discussions, we focus on the harmful effect that it is inflicting at a federal and state sanction level in the United States. For those directly impacted by the death penalty, this could be the victim and their families, but also the defendant and their families. In having discussions about the death penalty, there's arguments again in opposition and in favor of the death penalty. In favor of the death penalty, again, there's arguments that it's an embedded tradition again in American history with the execution in the American legal system, but also there's been arguments that deterrence was a factor. However, studies have shown that the actual results of this have been inconclusive. That is an argument no longer on the table, as it cannot prove that it actually deters future crimes or future homicides. There has been even studies looking at the opposite effect, something called the brutalization effect, where they're looking at the increase of execution rates and homicide rates in some areas, and looking at if government entities actually create a dehumanization effect, where the taking of one life virtually tells those in society that life has no value, and thus increases the homicide rate among those. But also the practicality has proven insufficient compared to life without parole that costs far less in considering what it takes to carry out an execution. Not only looking at the court costs, the appeals, but the lethal injections that are currently used include a chemical cocktail, and the pharmaceutical drugs involved are beyond costly. So that again is not an argument on the table. Again, along with the legal system, capital punishment we have seen instances of racial bias, wrongful convictions, and actual executions of innocent people. It's a system that is in error and has gotten it wrong, and simply is a violation against human rights. Next slide, thank you. This information was pulled for the Death Penalty Information Center fact sheet, and it really depicts how implicit and explicit bias is seen in considering capital punishment. Implicit, where we're more unaware of what we are projecting, and whether stereotypes, racial bias, prejudice, discrimination, rather than explicit, where we're very aware and intent with our actions and behavior. Implicit bias is more cases seen in cases of jury selection, but also in jurors and how they hand out death sentences. And race not so much plays a role on the race of the defendant, but the race of the victim. Whereas on the pie chart, you can see where the race of the victim was white, the defendant was more likely to receive a death sentence. Jurors in Washington state were 3 times more likely to recommend a death sentence for a Black defendant rather than a white defendant in similar cases. Also, 96% of states that have reviewed race as a death penalty and the patterns of race of victim and race of defendant have instances of discrimination. So it is something that is there, it has been researched, and it's something we look at when we discuss the death penalty and the reasons to abolish its use. Next slide, please. There have been a handful of landmark cases throughout the instatement of capital punishment and American history. The first being the Furman versus Georgia in 1972. This was the first and only instance where the Supreme Court in a 5-4 vote found the capital punishment, the death penalty, unconstitutional, as it violated the Eighth Amendment for cruel and unusual punishment, as it was disproportionately affecting minorities and the poor. In 1976, in Gregg versus Georgia case, it was what reinstated the death penalty. The Coker versus Georgia case was a 7-2 decision where the death penalty was found disproportionate for crimes of rape. And the Atkins versus Georgia case was a 2002, was a 6-3 ruling that found that basically those with you could not execute those with intellectual disabilities. And Roper versus Simmons was a case where a 5-4 voting ruled the execution of offenders younger than 18 is unconstitutional. And when you look at the recent years, 2002, 2005, this is fairly recent. We're in 2021. And up until this point, we have been executing minors, and we have been executing and have been those with intellectual disabilities, men and women and children. Next slide, please. In this image, this is a photo of Lisa Montgomery. She was executed this year, January 13th. When we look at this image of Lisa Montgomery, I really, if you could go back, thank you. If you could really look at that image of her as a child, while I kind of just read and provide information on her case. Lisa Montgomery was the first woman in the United States in 67 years to be on federal death row and executed. Her case, she received a death sentence for strangling a victim by the name of Bobby Jones Stinnett. She was 23 years old and a pregnant woman. And Lisa Montgomery cut and kidnapped the baby, and as Stinnett bled to death. The baby survived, and as Stinnett did pass. And reviewing these cases, and a lot of this research involved in the death penalty involves this. It's very hard going through the violent details, and it does become conflicting. And it's something that is, as Sister Helen Prugine, the more knowledge and time taken to really think about it is worthwhile. Because when you look at that image of Montgomery as a child, it's hard to imagine that she was capable of that, but it's also important to understand what this child went through. Her mitigating circumstances were immensely overlooked. She suffered from intellectual disabilities. She was sexually and physically abused by her father. Her mother sex trafficked her. She was a victim of human trafficking. We look at this image of Montgomery, and she is very much a human being, a child, and not only was her execution of extreme violence against her as a woman, but as a human, an immense violation against her human rights. And as I speak on the death penalty, I want, and focusing on this, I really want to focus on what support is needed, what we are doing, and what is not working, and what we can do to make it work. Next slide, please. So that was an overlook of the death penalty in the United States, where with the administration coming in, we're hoping to see the death penalty abolished at a national level. That is the point we're hoping to be at. The death penalty, capital punishment, is a global concern. The U.S. is in the leading countries on capital punishment forms of execution, and is right up there with practices along with China, Iran, Saudi Arabia, Iraq. When we look at this as a global concern, we want to protect the rights, the human rights of all, and women's rights, children's rights. There was a recent article I read from the World Coalition to Abolish the Death Penalty, where in Iran, women are being sentenced to death for far minor offenses than that of willful murder, where children are asked to participate along with these executions in some cases. that vary from country to country. But is a huge concern that calls for our attention, calls for our discussion, but calls for our action. Any action, big, small. Next slide, please. In connection with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, as Ms. Coloca beautifully read, when I have the discussion of the death penalty, I connected to this because when we think about the death penalty, whether in thinking of the defendant or the victim, we have to remember that all human beings are born free and equal in dignity. And when we think of the death penalty, when we think of those who committed offenses and their families and the victims, we think with reason and conscience, and we should act towards one another in a spirit of brotherhood. Next slide. In connection with our United Nations Sustainability Goals, Goal 16 encourages us to, by 2030, to promote peace, justice, and strong institutions, and calls us to stand up for human rights. As a major part of our goal, and the death penalty as a major violation against human rights, our goal is to stand up and abolish the death penalty and take action. Next slide. This image is of the leading organizations doing paramount work and working to abolish the death penalty. A lot of my information, and I always recommend to go to the Death Penalty Information Center for the most recent updates on what we have at a federal and state level in the United States. In Texas, we have a Texas Coalition to abolish the death penalty, where Kristen Keller is doing immense, incredible work and really to promote awareness, but also advocate for those on death row. The Texas After Violence Project is an incredible organization as well. They are digitally archiving the stories of the victims and the defendants and their families, the survivors impacted by the death penalty, and what that was really like. And I highly recommend reading or listening to any one of these testimonies to get an inside perspective on really what it is like to be at an execution. The Innocence Project is doing incredible work as well and providing legal services for those on death row and with wrongful convictions. And Amnesty International at a global level, Pax Christi is a Catholic organization as well doing incredible work. Next slide. So ultimately, when we talk about the death penalty, it is a system that's fought in errors and inflicting violence against women and against human rights. So ultimately, I aim and push and hope to abolish the death penalty, and by doing so, promote human rights and women's rights. We can do this by volunteering at events. You can become a member with any one of these organizations. You can participate at prayer visuals of an executions where I had the opportunity to read a prayer by Sister Helen Progine and a prayer to end the execution for the death penalty and abolish its use. We can follow the organizations, share on social media, and I strongly believe in the power of art and writing art, film, books, music, our conversations. These are tools and they're necessary to take the action that is needed. Each of us has unique gifts, unique abilities, strengths, skills, where we can intertwine this and offer that up and to abolish the death penalty. Next slide. In the chat box, I will be pasting the links to the organizations. If you'd like to get more information, join any of become a member. But again, thinking about the death penalty, it is a national, global concern impacting women and human rights. Abolishing its use is the ultimate goal. Thank you so much. And I will pass it now to Safi.
Thank you so much. That was great, Victoria. Thank you guys for coming. I just have a couple words to finish this off. UN Women is committed to gender equality and empowering women around the world. And today, we came to discuss the pressing issues concerning women, to help move the conversation of human rights forward to achieve equality. In this panel, we have addressed the impact of women's rights and roles in the world, speaking on Indigenous peoples, women's healthcare, immigration, and the death penalty. Through this, we hope this has been a tool for you to gain a better understanding of human rights that are being violated and how to address them. As it is said in Article 3 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, everyone has the right to life, liberty, and security of person. And Article 5, no one shall be subjected to torture or cruel and inhumane or degrading treatment or punishment. Our conversation today hopefully encourages the recognition of these vital ideas and a new discovery on current matters. At UIW, we seek to enlighten each other while empowering one another, searching for truth, communication, care, service, and justice. With this information, we hope there will be a greater conversation on the critical human rights that are being violated. Because as students, current and former, we hope to help enlighten people who are seeking truth and understanding. Women are integral to society, and that is why we place emphasis on seeing and hearing these issues. All people are entitled to equity, and the suppressed and ignored are entitled to equity, which is why we have highlighted the stories of those who do not have access to their full rights and freedoms. A single act of kindness throws out roots in all directions, and the roots spring up to make new trees. Amelia Earhart. Thank you so much. We don't have that much time left, but if anyone has any questions or some comments, please feel free to leave it in the chat, and hopefully we can all get to those. And if Sister Martha wants to interject at any point.
I am very grateful that in November, Dr. Sumaira Tech, who has previously taken women's groups to the United Nations, made the suggestion that we be a part of the virtual program. And I am extremely grateful that since December, caring young people have come into my Zoom room and done such outstanding research. And we have more presentations going on at 11. You can see that in the chat box, more presentations tomorrow. And we hope that you will join us for all of them. For just a few minutes, we could have questions. If anyone wants to unmute their microphone and speak a question or speak a comment.
Well, while you guys are thinking about that, I've also put on the screen all the LinkedIn information for all the speakers that we had today. And if you guys want to talk to us further, we would all love to hear from you or to connect with any of our viewers today. So feel free to reach out to us. I know Sema also as well put the contact information in the chat box.
Darcy, this is Dr. Gonzalez. I was wondering if you could send me a copy of the presentation, as I would, if it's okay with everyone, I would like to put it on our website at the Edling Center, so that others that may not have had an opportunity to visit us today may be able to visit, and then to also add maybe the speakers onto that PowerPoint, so then if there's people that may be viewing later, that they could reach out to the speakers. But congratulations to all the student presenters. Outstanding job. I'm very thankful for all those that were participating and listening. And again, if you have questions, maybe not at this time, but may think of something later, please reach out to these students and also to Dr. Sister Martha Ann Kirk for any other support or needs. But thank you, great job.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. And we really do have great presentations that start in about 15 minutes. I see Kishori Lanier. She is going to present her original research from Theater for Social Change about a lynching of her great aunt in the 1800s and intergenerational trauma of racism. We have some fine people from our medical school who will be presenting, and we have a friend from Africa who will be presenting. I want you to know that over 10 years ago, Women's Global Connection, a group of faculty, friends, sisters at our university, started as an online presence, and over 10 years ago, doing online friendships, bonding, capacity building with women in Africa. Then I have taken students to Bethlehem, the Middle East. We've done partnerships there. We've done partnerships lately with Peru. And so it's an ongoing process. We are one global family encouraging each other. Any last word or last things in the chat box?
Sister Martha, if I can just quickly add, again, thank you to all of the speakers for their time, their courage, for sharing your knowledge with others and your personal stories. And just to do a quick save the date, the Etling Center is planning a girls summit, something similar to this, sometime in the fall. So we will be working out the details, and hopefully we can see you all there.
Great. Usually that involves 6 months of girls leadership training every week. So if we're going to do it in the fall, let's hit the ground running. And tomorrow morning, it'll be 9 o'clock time in Texas. You'll have a chance to hear about the last 8 years of Girls Global Summits and how it's circles of mentoring. This group mentors this group, which mentors this group, which mentors this group. Sounds wonderful.
Well, thank you all for coming to our meeting today, and you can now feel free to leave and go to see some of the other wonderful speaker events today. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sister Martha Ann. For tomorrow, are we going to do the interpretations?
Pardon me?
Are we going to do interpretations for tomorrow?